Well, it is a predictable cycle. Jihadists carry out high-profile attacks like the ones in Paris and San Bernardino, and the world experiences a subsequent spike in Islamophobia. Zainab Chaudry is with the Council on American Islamic Relations and joins me now. Welcome back to the broadcast, Zainab.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming in. I was reading in London alone over the past year, they have seen an uptick in attacks against Muslims by 70%, 60% of those against women. What is behind this, and has it become a gradual mainstreaming of Islamophobia?
We're seeing more recently, there is definitely a significant spike in anti-Muslim bigotry and Islamophobia that's contributing to these attacks, not only in London, but all across globally, all across the Western world especially. We know that it's linked in some part to terrorist organizations like ISIS and Boko Haram that are doing terrible acts, committing terrible acts of atrocities that are being linked to the religion of Islam. But these are only a very tiny fringe minority of the Muslim population who are engaged in these kind of acts, but they're being given a platform to elevate their propaganda.
So is there a gradual growing anti-Muslim sentiment? Because, for instance, as I just said in London, this was before the Paris attacks, up 70%. That's a large number.
Now, we've seen there's a tremendous spike in anti-Muslim sentiment all across Europe and all across, the United States and in parts of Great Britain specifically. And it's very disturbing. It's very concerning to see this kind of rhetoric, the kind of fear-mongering and rhetoric that's contributing to this spike.
In this day and age, how do Muslims separate themselves from ISIL and this ideology?
That's the million-dollar question that unfortunately our communities are still struggling to answer. Whenever a terrorist attack occurs and there is a Muslim who is suspected linked to it in some way, the entire Muslim community globally is required or is expected to condemn it and vocally distance themselves from the actions of these horrific, individuals or barbaric individuals who are engaged in it. The truth is the vast majority of Muslims do not relate to these attacks. They don't condone them. They don't believe that our religion adheres to it or abides by it or even supports it. So that's what we are elevating the voices of the moderate majority and making sure that their voices are being heard. People who don't identify with ISIL, which is the vast majority of the world's 1.5 billion Muslim population, are being given an opportunity to voice their opposition to them.
We've heard from a U.S. presidential candidate who has been saying that he would like to ban all Muslims from entering the U.S. if elected until this situation works itself out. How dangerous is this to isolate a certain sect of the population?
It's incredibly dangerous, and we've seen the consequences of this already. Over in the past few weeks, we've seen a tremendous spike in hate crimes and backlash towards Muslims, not only in the United States, but in London, across the world.
Do we need to hear more loudly and clearly from organizations like yourself to stand up and push back against the extremists?
It has to be a united effort. The Muslim community is certainly standing up and vocally condemning the kind of rhetoric that we're hearing, but we need to have our interfaith allies also speak out with us to make sure that this kind of rhetoric doesn't get the publicity and support that it is getting.